that had roots. She didn't pity. She noticed. "I heard you were back," she said, with a half smile. Sawyer opened the door wider. News travels fast. "It's Pineville," she shrugged, "and the sheriff's cousin plays bingo with my neighbor." He offered coffee. She accepted. Inside, Rachel looked around the small living room and then toward the loft. "Are they okay?" she asked quietly. Sawyer rubbed the back of his neck. "They're quiet." Rachel nodded, then set her cup down. "Can I see them?" Clara and Maisie had just come downstairs, dressed in oversized sweaters and leggings Sawyer found in an old trunk. Clara froze when she saw Rachel. Maisie stepped slightly in front of her sister. "Hi there," Rachel said gently, crouching down to their level. "I'm Miss Rachel. I used to be your dad's friend when we were about your age. I also teach second grade at Pineville Elementary. That's where you'll be going after break." Maisie said nothing. Clara's eyes darted to the door, then to Echo. Rachel didn't push. "I brought something," she said, reaching into her bag. It was a small coloring book and a box of thick, easy grip crayons. "You don't have to use them now. Just wanted to bring something cheerful." Maisie took the items, then looked to Sawyer as if asking permission. He gave a small nod. The girls retreated to the corner of the living room and sat down on a rug beside Echo, who settled beside them like a guardian lion. Rachel sat back on the couch beside Sawyer. "She won't look anyone in the eye," she said softly. "That's not shyness. That's learned behavior. Has anyone looked at their arms or backs for bruises?" Sawyer's jaw clenched. "Not yet. I'm trying not to push. You might not have to," Rachel said. "Children show you what they've been through, just not in words." Later that afternoon, Sawyer took the girls outside. The snow had softened and packed enough for a walk. He led them into the woods behind the cabin, Echo by their side. Clara stayed close to the dog. Maisie was more curious, pointing out paw prints and broken branches. They built a small snowman together. Clara didn't smile, but she didn't flinch when Sawyer helped her pack snow. That was progress. That night, Sawyer tried something new. He laid out cookie dough on the counter and handed each girl a spoon. "Ever made cookies before?" he asked. Maisie shook her head. Clara looked at the dough wearily. Rachel, who had returned in the late afternoon with groceries and a set of fresh pajamas for the girls, chimed in. "They're magic cookies. They don't burn if you laugh while baking." Maisie cracked a tiny smile. Clara glanced at her sister, then back to the bowl. She poked it. By the time the first batch came out of the oven, the cabin smelled like cinnamon and brown sugar. The firelight flickered. Clara sat in Sawyer's lap, head resting against his chest. Maisie was curled up with Echo on the rug, watching the flames dance. Rachel leaned against the kitchen counter, Heary's not leaving the girls. "Start writing this down," she whispered to Sawyer. "Every little detail, every odd behavior, it may be their only voice when the time comes." Sawyer nodded slowly. He looked down at Clara. Her eyes were open, staring into the fire, but her breathing had slowed. She didn't seem afraid anymore, just tired. It was just after midnight when Echo started growling. Not loud, but low and deliberate, like a storm, rumbling beneath the earth. Sawyer sat upright on the couch where he had dozed off, a folded blanket slipping off his lap. He could see Echo's eyes glowing in the soft light from the stove, fixed on the corner of the living room where Claire and Maisie had earlier left a pile of their belongings. Echo stood, limped toward the heap of toys and clothing, and sniffed with focused intensity at the smallest item among them, a beige worn teddy bear with one eye stitched back on and a ribbon frayed at the ends. The bear had come from Sylvia's house, packed among the hastily gathered things during their rushed departure. Sawyer stood and approached slowly. "What is it, boy?" he asked, crouching next to the dog. Echo gave a short, clipped bark once. was a tone Sawyer hadn't heard since Afghanistan. When Echo had once detected a tripwire buried under dust and sand, the signal was clear. Something was off. Sawyer picked up the teddy bear carefully. It was heavier than it should be. He turned, it over Andren his fingers along the seams. At the base, just under the left paw, he felt a bump beneath the fabric. He grabbed a pocket key knife from the kitchen drawer and made a careful incision. Inside, Wasa thumbnail-sized audio device, its blinking red light dull and quiet. For a few seconds, Sawyer just stared at it. Then he carried it to his old laptop, connected a universal reader, and loaded the contents. The file was unprotected. Either Sylvia had been careless or overly confident. When the audio began, the cabin seemed to grow colder despite the fire still crackling in the stove. Sylvia's voice came through clearly, a slow drawl masked in sugar. "You will not speak to him about anything. Do you understand me, Clara? If you do, I'll make sure your sister gets sent away, far away, somewhere you can't follow." There was a pause, then Clara's small voice, barely audible. "He's our dad." "Your father left," Sylvia snapped. "He left because he didn't want you. I stayed. I'm the one who feeds you, who keeps this house from falling apart." There was more. Threats wrapped in affection, warnings disguised as concern. Sawyer listened to every word. By the end, his hands were trembling, his jaw clenched so tightly it ached. He reached for his phone and messaged Rachel. "We have something. Come early." Upstairs, the girls were still asleep. Echo had returned to the foot of Clara's bed. Sawyer walked up softly and checked on them. Clara was clutching the torn bear, unaware of what had been hidden inside. He gently pulled a blanket higher over her shoulder, then turned to leave. But Clara stirred. She sat up abruptly, eyes wide, but not quite awake. Her breathing was shallow. "Quick! Mom!" she murmured, staring past Sawyer. "I didn't say anything. I didn't." Sawyer moved to her side. "Clara, it's okay. You're safe." But she didn't hear him. She slid out of bed and walked barefoot down the stairs, arms wrapped around herself. Echo followed immediately, tail stiff. Sawyer let her go, but stayed close. Outside, the snow had stopped falling. The moonlight spilled across the backyard in sheets of pale silver. Clara sat down in the middle of the frozen garden, hugging her knees. Echo sat beside her. Sawyer approached, kneeling down slowly so as not to startle her. She held something in her hands, an old creased photo. It showed a young woman with soft brown hair and a gentle smile holding two infants in her arms. Sawyer recognized the image. It was taken the day after the girls were born, back when his wife was still alive, and everything had seemed possible. Clara looked up at him, her voice small. "I don't remember her smile, not really." Sawyer swallowed the ache in his chest. "She loved you more than anything. You both were her whole world." I think Sylvia didn't like that," Clara whispered. "She didn't," Sawyer said quietly. "But that doesn't mean she gets to take your memories away." Clara finally cried. It wasn't loud, but it was raw. Sawyer pulled her into his arms, held her as her body shook, and felt Echo press his head into Clara's side like a silent sentinel. By dawn, Rachel had arrived, wrapped in a thick down jacket and holding a thermos of tea. She listened to the audio file without saying a word. Then she opened her notebook and began taking notes. "We need to get this documented," she said. "You need to call Lisa Daniels." Lisa was a child protection attorney Rachel had worked with once, a woman known for being relentless and deeply principled. Sawyer had heard of her through veteran networks. She had helped another military family through a nasty custody battle years ago. "She'll want to see the kids," Rachel continued. "And she'll want more evidence, but this," she gestured to the laptop. "This is a hell of a start." While Rachel sat with the girls at the kitchen table helping them color new pages in the workbook she'd brought, Sawyer stepped outside to the front porch. He dialed the number Rachel gave him. A woman picked up on the second ring, Lisa Daniels speaking. "Hi, my name is Sawyer Grant. I was told you might be able to help. It's about my daughters." There was a pause. "What's going on, Mr. Grant?" "I have proof that their stepmother emotionally abused them, possibly more. I have them with me now. They're safe, but I don't have legal custody yet, and she's going to come for them." "I know it." Lisa's voice didn't falter. "I'll need files, audio, dates, and witness statements. Can you get that to me today?" "I can," Sawyer said, "and I want to fight all the way." Lisa paused. "Good. Because if what you say is true, that woman doesn't get to hide behind silence anymore." As he hung up, Echo came to sit beside him, pressing his side into Sawyer's leg. The dog stared out into the snow-covered woods, as if sensing that things were moving now, that something buried was beginning to come into light. The air in Pineville had turned sharper by the fourth morning, a brittle cold settling across the forest that whispered through the pines like a memory that refused to stay buried. A layer of frost glazed the cabin windows, catching the morning, light like thin blades of silver. Inside, the fire had long died to glowing embers, but the living room pulsed with a quiet energy as Rachel slid a USB drive across the kitchen table. Lisa Daniels sat on the opposite side, focused and unreadable. In her early 40s, Lisa had the composed elegance of someone who had learned long ago how to control a courtroom without ever raising her voice. She was tall and square-shouldered, her black coat still speckled with melted snow. Her eyes, a cool slate, blue, scanned everything as if memorizing the room in pieces. Her hair was pinned back in a loose twist, and she carried no purse, only a leather folio marked with initials and a faint scratch near the corner. "They're safe here," Rachel said gently, folding her hands. "But we're running out of time. Sylvia is deliberate." Lisa didn't respond immediately. She inserted the USB into her slim laptop and opened the audio files. For the next 2 minutes, the only sound was Sylvia's voice, coaxing, commanding, manipulating. When it ended, Lisa exhaled through her nose and sat back slightly. "She's good," Lisa murmured. "Too good. She knows the system, knows how to present control as caretaking. She's already trying to cover her tracks," Sawyer said from the corner, arms folded. He had been silent until now, watching both women with a soldier's caution. Lisa turned to him. "Have either of the girls been seen by a licensed child psychologist?" "Not yet. Clara barely talks unless Echo's beside her." "We can change that," Lisa said. "I'll coordinate with Dr. Helen Brandt. She's nearby. Specializes in trauma recovery for children under 10, but it has to look routine. If Sylvia catches wind of a formal evaluation, she'll spin it as coercion." Sawyer gave a slow nod. Lisa continued. "The key isn't what you believe, Mr. Grant. It's what we can show. If Clara's symptoms align with PTSD or known trauma behaviors, the court will have to take notice, especially if we have audio that backs it." Rachel stood and pulled a canvas tote from a nearby chair. She started drawing. Inside were a dozen loose pages, crayon images scribbled in heavy lines. Lisa took them one by one. One depicted 2 small figures in a closet-like box, arms curled, around their knees. Another showed a tall woman in a beige dress, a speech bubble above her reading. "Say it right. Say, perfect mommy." Several had repeating color themes, black shadows and red mouths, wide and voiceless. Lisa tapped her finger on one drawing. "Children don't fabricate emotional dynamics this complex. These aren't just pictures, they're testimony." Later that afternoon, Lisa contacted Dr. Helen Brandt. The psychologist agreed to see Clara the next day under the pretense of a routine wellness check. Helen was in her 50s, a warm presence with a practical mind and a voice that slowed down when children tensed. Her office sat on the edge of Pineville, tucked into a cottage-style building flanked by overgrown lilac bushes now buried in snow. Meanwhile, Clara had grown more attached to Echo. The dog rarely left her side, and whenever her fingers began to color with black crayon, Echo would lean his body against her arm or nuzzle gently at her elbow, as if anchoring her in place. One afternoon, she reached out mid-sketch and softly rubbed behind Echo's ear. "You remember too, don't you?" she whispered. Maisie, sitting across from her with a paintbrush, looked up briefly but didn't interrupt. She had taken to humming while painting. Light, tuneless hums that floated through the air like threads of fabric being woven back together. Back at the Monroe estate, Sylvia had sensed the shift. Something in the air told her the balance was tipping. Her steps grew quieter, her calls with lawyers more frequent. She began writing detailed notes, fabricated entries that painted Clara, and Maisie as emotionally unstable, with sudden outbursts and unpredictable fears. In her mind, Sylvia wasn't Avalanche. She was a woman who had been left behind twice. First by the man she thought she could save. Then by the children she tried to reshape. She wore her bitterness like perfume, invisible but lingering. Alone in her study, she typed out medical records she never intended to submit, only to hint at when necessary. She clipped false articles about inherited trauma, drafted emails to a private counselor she'd never meet. But Sylvia underestimated one thing. Silence doesn't always mean submission. Sometimes it's a gathering storm. The next day, Rachel and Sawyer brought Clara to Dr. Brandt's office. The waiting room had soft colors, sage walls, plush blue chairs, shelves lined with storybooks and sand trays. Clara didn't speak during intake, but when Echo was allowed inside the room, she sat close enough to let Dr. Brandt ask her name. Over the course of an hour, Dr. Brandt used play therapy, dolls, drawings, simple storytelling prompts. Clara responded. Minimally, but her choices were telling. The mean lady doll was always in control. The little girls never had a bed. When asked to draw a house, Clara drew bars over the windows. After the session, Dr. Brandt met privately with Sawyer and Rachel. She shows classic signs of emotional neglect and coercive control, the doctor explained. There are no signs of delusion or fabrication. I'll write a preliminary report, but it will take a few more sessions for something comprehensive. Sawyer looked through the glass window at Clara, who was sitting with Echo, quietly petting the dog as he dozed with his chin on her knee. "She's just a little girl," Sawyer said softly. "She is," Dr. Brandt replied, "but she's also a witness." That evening at the cabin, Rachel handed Sawyer a folder. Inside was Lisa's initial legal motion, a petition for emergency review of custody. The next step would be to file with the county court under grounds of psychological harm. "You'll need to be ready," Rachel said, voice low. "Sylvia is going to come swinging." Sawyer closed the folder slowly. Letter. "I've been fighting wars long enough. It's time I fight for something that matters." Outside, the forest rustled under a sudden gust of wind. Inside, Clara curled up beside Echo with a sketch pad, drawing a single candle inside a room with no doors. The sky above Pineville that morning was the color of steel wool, heavy, dull and low, with the scent of rain thick in the wind. A steady drizzle had already begun by the time Sylvia Fairmont arrived at Sawyer's cabin, her sleek black SUV crunching over, the gravel like a threat on four wheels. She stepped out dressed in a camel-colored wool coat, her platinum blonde hair tied in a high knot, makeup pristine despite the moisture in the air. She carried herself with an air of practiced calm, but her eyes scanned the cabin like a hawk, searching, waiting. Sylvia had always known how to wear her charm like armor. To the town of Pineville, she was the grieving stepmother who had tried to hold a broken family together after Sawyer Grant disappeared on military duty. In public, she smiled with her eyes and carried tissues in her purse for others' tears. In private, her kindness came with conditions, and when love was not returned, it soured into control. "I'd like just a few hours with them," she said sweetly, addressing both Sawyer and Rachel. "To pick up their favorite toys. It's Maisie's plush rabbit. And Clara's storybooks. Just until Sunday." Rachel, standing just behind Sawyer on the cabin porch, tensed visibly. She wore a moss-green parka, rain droplets beating on the shoulders. "That's not part of the agreement, Sylvia. This isn't a visitation." "It's a gesture," Sylvia interrupted, her voice soft, almost hurt. "You're acting like I'm the villain." Echo, who had been quietly sitting by Clara's side, suddenly let out a low, guttural growl. His sable fur bristled, and he stepped forward, placing his body between the girls and Sylvia. Clara clutched Maisie's hand tighter. "Echo's never growled like that," Sawyer said, eyes narrowing. His jaw was tight, a vein pulsing at the temple. "Something's wrong." Sylvia's lips curved into a frozen smile. "Dogs are sensitive to tension. Perhaps Yorsh has picked up on the paranoia." Despite his better judgment, Sawyer hesitated. He didn't want to give Sylvia reason to claim he was obstructing their relationship, and the law, frustratingly slow, was still catching up with what they knew in their bones. Rachel crouched down beside the girls. "Would you feel safe going with her just for a short while?" she asked gently. Maisie glanced at Clara. Clara shook her head almost imperceptibly. Sawyer stepped closer. "If anything feels off, you call me. I'll be right behind you." The girls were buckled into the back seat of Sylvia's SUV not long after. Echo paced restlessly on the porch as the vehicle reversed out of the driveway. Sawyer gave Rachel a look, sharp, urgent, and slipped into his own truck parked around the bend. He followed at a cautious distance. What should have been a 15-minute drive back toward Pineville turned into something else entirely. A mile before the town's edge, Sylvia took a sudden turn down an old Forest Service road, one that hadn't been used regularly in years. The SUV's taillights flickered through sheets of rain as she accelerated down the gravel path. Sawyer's pulse quickened. He kept his truck far enough not to be seen, but close enough to act. Inside the SUV, Clara gripped Maisie's hand. "Where are we going?" Maisie asked. Sylvia didn't answer. Her face was hard now, the mask slipping. Clara's voice trembled. "We're not going home, are we?" Sylvia glanced at them through the rearview mirror. "You'll understand later." As the road curved, Clara's hand shot to the door handle. Her heart pounded. She reached across her sister, popped the lock, and flung the door open. "Maisie, jump!" Maisie hesitated just a second too long. Clara leapt out first, rolling onto the muddy roadside. Behind them, Echo, who had bolted after Sawyer's truck from the moment it moved, came crashing through the trees. The German Shepherd, despite the limp in his rear leg, lunged toward the SUV. Sylvia slammed on the brakes, screaming. Maisie tumbled out, landing hard. Echo placed himself in front of the girls, barking ferociously as Sylvia tried to lurch forward again. But by then, Sawyer's headlights were already cutting through the mist. Behind him, another vehicle appeared. Rachel's compact Subaru, blue police, lights flashing behind it. Deputy Nate Ellison, tall and square-jawed with a soaked brown Saxon, stepped out into the storm. "Hands where I can see them, Miss Fairmont," he shouted. Sylvia froze. Her grip loosened on the steering wheel. Maisie sobbed into Clara's shoulder. Clara reached out and wrapped her arms around Echo's damp neck, her small hands shaking. "I was scared she wouldn't stop," Clara whispered when Sawyer reached her side. That was the first sentence she'd spoken to him since the day he returned. Sawyer dropped to one knee beside her, soaked to the bone. "I'm here, baby. I'm not going anywhere." Deputy Ellison approached, cuffs in hand. Sylvia, now pale, said nothing. Her silence was louder than any plea. Later, back at the cabin, Rachel carefully cleaned Echo's leg. A small gash had reopened during the chase, but it wasn't deep. Echo, ever stoic, rested with his head in Clara's lap, tail thumping weakly whenever. she whispered to him. Lisa Daniels arrived just before dusk. Her arrival, marked by the sound of tires over wet gravel, brought with it a different kind of quiet, a serious, settled calm that spoke of resolution. "We have enough now," Lisa said to Sawyer after hearing the full report. "Attempted parental abduction, endangerment, violation of verbal agreements. She'll be denied visitation, possibly permanently." Clara curled beside Echo on the couch, a blanket over her shoulders. Maisie painted quietly nearby, drawing a field with 3 figures and a dog beneath a tall tree. Rachel stood by the window, watching the storm ease into a soft drizzle. She turned toward the fire, where Sawyer sat with his daughters on either side. "Sometimes," she said gently, "the truth doesn't just come to light. Sometimes it has to run through the rain to be found." The morning of the hearing, Pineville lay under a thin crust of late winter frost. Pale sunlight filtered through the branches of the pine trees, their needles glistening like glass. The courthouse, a red brick building on the corner of Maple and Fifth, stood quiet but tense, its windows catching the breath of a town holding still. Inside, courtroom B hummed with hushed murmurs. The rows were filled with familiar faces, neighbors, teachers, even the barista from the local cafe, all drawn by the same undercurrent: curiosity, justice, and the weight of something unsaid for too long. Sylvia Monroe sat at the defendant's table, her hair pulled into a tight French twist, lips a shade too dark for the pale drawn faces she now wore. Her tan designer suit looked out of place beside the plain oak bench and solemn stairs. She had refused legal representation, insisting she could speak for herself. Pride, even now, was her only armor. Opposite her sat Sawyer Grant in a dark navy suit. Not the uniform of a soldier, but the clothing of a father trying to look composed for his daughters. Clara sat beside him holding Echo's leash, while Maisie drew flowers on a legal pad, oblivious to the storm unfolding. Echo, his injured leg, bandaged but steady, lay by Clara's feet, occasionally lifting his head toward the sound of tension in the room. At the prosecution table stood Lisa Daniels, a woman in her late 40s, with silvering brown hair tied neatly in a low bun. Her presence was sharp and steady. Every movement was deliberate, as though she'd done this 100 times before and knew exactly when to let silence speak louder than words. "Your Honor," Lisa began, "this is not merely a case of custody. It is a case of sustained psychological harm, deliberate manipulation, and attempted abduction. The court has heard the recordings recovered from a toy provided not as comfort, but as surveillance. We have seen the drawings of confinement. We have medical testimony confirming signs of trauma, and we ask respectfully but firmly for protection for these children from the person who inflicted it." Sylvia stood as if rising from a fire. Her voice when it came was shrill but oddly composed. "I raised them alone for 2 years. I fed them, clothed them, read them bedtime stories. I taught them manners. What Sawyer calls control, I call parenting. If they were scared, it was because he left." Her words were sliced in half by a firm interjection. "Exhibit C, Your Honor," Lisa said, holding up a printed image. On it, Clara had drawn 2 girls behind bars, one with her mouth sewn shut, the other covering her eyes. A tall woman loomed in the background, labeled only as Mommy. Judge Emerson, a stern-faced woman in her early 60s with sharp cheekbones and short iron gray curls, examined the picture. Her eyes betrayed no emotion, but her grip tightened slightly on the file before her. Lisa continued, "We are not here to debate parenting styles. We are here because these children feared for their safety. They were threatened into silence. And when that failed, the defendant attempted to remove them from town without permission." Sylvia's laugh was bitter and brief. "Those kids are soft. You coddle them and they'll break at the first challenge. I was raised harder and I survived." "You did," Lisa replied calmly. "But that survival came at a cost, didn't it?" The room fell quiet. For a fleeting second, Sylvia's mask cracked. Her eyes dropped and her lips trembled before hardening once again. I did what I thought was best. Judge Emerson leaned forward. "Ms. Monroe," she said, voice measured, "intent does not erase impact. The law is clear, the evidence overwhelming." Then came the sentence. This court finds Sylvia Monroe guilty of 3 counts: willful, emotional, and physical endangerment of minors, falsification of medical documents, with intent to deceive, and unlawful attempted parental abduction. The sentence is 6 years imprisonment, followed by 2 years probation. Additionally, you are barred from contact with any child under the age of 16 for a period of 10 years after release. Sylvia didn't argue. She didn't cry. She just sat down. No one moved to comfort her. In the back, Rachel Fairbanks, the quiet strength behind many of the documents submitted, let out a long, breathless sigh. She looked down at her hands, clasped tightly in her lap, and finally smiled. Afterward, outside the courthouse, Sawyer knelt before his girls. "It's done," he whispered. "You're staying with Mealways." Maisie threw her arms around him. Clara did too, slower, gentler. But this time, she didn't let go first. Later that week, a true birthday party bloomed in the garden of their home beneath the pines. It was a warm day for early spring, the first soft green buds clinging to the branches above. There was a cake this time, a real one, with 6 candles, and vanilla frosting and too many sprinkles. The tablecloth was crooked, the balloons were lopsided, and the banner said, "Happy You Day," in crayon letters. But it was perfect. Echo wore a party hat and sat proudly beside Clara, who fed him tiny bites of cake when no one was watching. Rachel brought mason jars of lemonade and a Polaroid camera. Deputy Ellison even dropped by in uniform but bearing a gift: a carved wooden dog figurine with the name Echo etched underneath. Sawyer stood with Lisa near the porch, watching the girls run barefoot across the wet grass. "Did you mean it?" Lisa asked. "About staying in Pineville?" He nodded. "There's enough here to build something, real. And the center, it'll start small, just a room, but eventually a place for kids like mine." Lisa looked at him. "You've come far." "I almost didn't," he admitted. But then again, Echo didn't limp away. He ran straight into danger. Guess I learned something from him. The sun dipped lower through the trees, casting long shadows over the cabin. The laughter, the dog, and the man who had finally come home. Sometimes God sends miracles in the shape of a dog or a father who comes back just in time. This story isn't just about justice. It's about healing, about how scars don't mean the story is over. They mean the fight was survived. In a world that often turns cold, sometimes all it takes is one act of courage. A bark in the dark, a door that opens, a child's whisper to light the way home again. If you believe in second chances, in the quiet strength of love, and in the unseen ways God works through even the most broken of things, then this story is for you. Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story touched your heart, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with someone who needs a little hope today. Hit that subscribe button to stay close to stories that matter. And may God bless you and protect every child, every parent, and every loyal friend, two-legged or four, who still believes in miracles. Welcome back to another episode from Barking Bond's Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from today? We'd love to know. Now, get comfortable, take a deep breath, and let's dive into today's gripping story. A man who had once been the shadow in the most dangerous corners of the world was finally coming home. Not just to any home. Pineville, the quiet, snow-covered town where his 2 little girls waited. Or at least, that's what he believed. After 2 years overseas, serving as a Special Forces soldier, Sawyer Grant imagined this day over and over. He would walk through the door, scoop up his twin daughters in his arms, and watch their faces light up with joy. He thought there would be balloons tied to chairs, cake waiting on the table, and the sound of laughter echoing down the hallway. But when the moment came, there was no laughter, no balloons, no cake. What he found instead stopped him in his tracks. A dim, cold storage room that smelled of dust and old wood. In the center, two small girls sat side by side on rickety chairs, whispering their birthday wishes over a single crust of dry bread. Stuck in the middle was a pink candle, burning low, its flame the only warmth in the room. There was no party, only silence, heavy and suffocating. And the woman who was supposed to protect and love them, she was already making plans to send them away. This is a story of betrayal, of quiet endurance, and of a bond that nothing could break. Not distance, not time, not even pain. It is the story of a wounded dog who still trusted, a father who returned at the last possible moment, and two little girls who found their voices, not through shouting, but by holding on. Before we begin, tell me, where in the world are you watching from tonight? The winter sky over Pineville was already folding into darkness. Snow clung to rooftops and sidewalks, while tall pine trees stood still and solemn, their branches heavy with white, like sentinels keeping watch. The cold that evening was sharper than usual, each breath hanging in the air like smoke. Beyond, the quiet street stood the tall iron gates of the Monroe estate, the kind of gates meant to keep the world out. Sawyer Grant had once called this town home. Before the war sent him across deserts, over mountains, and into places where survival was never promised, Pineville was where he belonged. Now, returning at 41 years old, he stepped out of his battered SUV. His boots crunched over gravel, his broad shoulders framed by the fading light. His skin was rough, kissed by years of harsh suns, and his dark brown hair was kept close, to the scalp in a soldier's neat cut. His gray eyes, always scanning, moved over the property like radar. Beside him limped his closest companion, Echo, a 7-year-old German shepherd with a sable black coat worn thin at the haunches. A faint hitch in the dog's step told the story of an old wound, a shrapnel injury from a mission gone wrong in Kandahar, the same mission where Echo had dragged Sawyer out of a collapsing building. Since then, they were more than soldier and service dog. They were family. Today was December 10th, Clara and Maisie's birthday. He hadn't seen them in 14 months. His calls had been ignored, his messages unanswered. The last time he'd heard Clara's voice, it was faint and far away, as if she were speaking from another world. "I miss you, Daddy," she had whispered before someone took the phone away. Maisie hadn't even been allowed to speak, but today, he told himself, would be different. Yet as he looked around, he saw no signs of a celebration. The driveway was swept clean. No balloons floated in the air. No faint echo of children's laughter drifted from the house. This was Sylvia Monroe's house now, his late wife's former friend who had stepped into their lives after tragedy. In the first months after the accident, when grief had hollowed him out, Sawyer had been too broken to refuse her help. Within months, they had married, but love had never taken root. Sylvia was tall, poised, and careful, her glossy black hair always tied in a low, perfect bun. She wore beige silk as if it were armor, her smile soft, her voice gentle. But Sawyer knew better. She didn't shout. She didn't need to. Her control came in whispers that cut sharper than any blade. He didn't go to the front door. Instead, he followed a narrow stone path behind the house, through frost-covered hedges and past ivy glazed with ice. Echo's ears twitched before Sawyer heard it himself. A soft, almost trembling hum. The storage shed door creaked as he pushed it open. A single flickering bulb cast a pale light over the scene. There, on a broken cardboard box, sat a small porcelain plate holding a slice of dry bread with a pink candle stuck in the center. Clara was sitting upright, her little hands folded tightly in her lap. She wore 2 sweaters that still looked too thin for the cold, her long brown hair tied into twin braids. Her cheeks were hollow, her lips moving soundless words over the candlelight. When the door opened, she flinched. "Clara," Sawyer said, his voice breaking. "Is this your birthday party?" She didn't answer, only looked at him for a moment before lowering her gaze. Echo padded forward, pressing his head gently against her leg. She didn't move, but her small fingers buried themselves in his fur. "Where's your sister?" Sawyer asked. "In her room," Clara murmured. "She didn't want to come." Before he could say more, footsteps clicked across the patio. Sylvia appeared wrapped in a beige robe, a steaming cup of tea in one hand and her phone in the other. She froze for just a second when she saw him, then smiled, a smile that didn't touch her eyes. "You're home," she said lightly. "I didn't expect you this early." "What is this?" Sawyer's voice was tight. "She insisted on lighting a candle. I was just getting them ready for dinner," Sylvia replied, stepping inside and plucking the bread from the plate with 2 fingers. "Far too dry. I have no idea where she found it. Sweetheart, you shouldn't be out here." Her tone softened for Clara, then turned smooth again for Sawyer. "I was organizing a surprise cake inside." Sawyer glanced around. No cake, no decorations, no evidence of any celebration. "Where's Maisie?" he asked. "Upstairs drawing, I think. Would you like to come in?" "It's freezing." "I think," Sawyer said slowly, "I'll be taking the girls home with me tonight." "That's not how this works, Sawyer." "You don't have legal custody," Sylvia replied, her voice firm now. Sawyer stepped closer, his words sharp. "Then I'll call the sheriff and explain why my daughter is blowing out a candle on a piece of bread in a storage shed." Sylvia's smile thinned. "You're overreacting again." Clara's hand gripped tighter into Echo's fur. This time, when she looked up, her eyes weren't afraid. They were pleading. That was all Sawyer needed. He placed a hand gently on her back. "Come on, sweetheart. Let's get your sister." Sylvia didn't move to stop them. Maisie came, down the stairs moments later, holding a crumpled, half-colored page. She looked just like Clara, but fuller in the cheeks. Though tonight, even her usual spark was gone. Without a word, she took her sister's hand and followed their father out, into the falling snow. Back in the SUV as Sawyer buckled them in, Clara whispered, "Is it okay, Daddy? Are we really going?" He met her eyes in the mirror. "Yes, we're going home." The cabin sat beneath a thick canopy of pine trees, their snow-laden branches whispering with each gust of wind. It was modest, weathered cedar siding, a pitched roof with a stovepipe chimney, and windows trimmed with faded green shutters. Nestled at the forest's edge, it had been years since Sawyer stepped inside. The air inside smelled of cedar and old memories. The cast-iron stove crackled to life, filling the space with warmth. Maisie and Clara stood by the door, still in their coats, unsure if they could settle. Clara clung to her sister's sleeve. Maisie's lips were pressed tight, not with stubbornness, but the kind of quiet that comes from learning too soon how to keep secrets. Sawyer took their coats and knelt by Echo. "You know what to do," he murmured. The old dog limped toward Clara, settling just inches from her. She didn't look at him, but leaned slightly toward his warmth. By nightfall, Sawyer had made a simple dinner, grilled cheese and soup. The girls picked at it quietly. Clara would only eat if Echo sat beside her. At bedtime, he led them upstairs to the loft, where 2 small beds waited under quilts his mother had sewn years ago. Maisie climbed in without a word. Clara hesitated. "Do you want Echo to stay?" Sawyer asked softly. She nodded. Echo trotted up and lay on the rug between the beds. Only then did she crawl under the covers. Sawyer turned off the light, leaving only the glow of a firefly-shaped nightlight. From the hallway, he listened. Maisie whispered something to Clara, but Clara didn't reply. The silence was deep, but not peaceful. The next morning, the woods outside were hushed under fresh snow. Sawyer poured himself a mug of black coffee and stared out the window. The world looked quiet, deceptively still. He knew that kind of quiet. It was the same one before an ambush. There was a knock on the front door, sharp but light, echo raised. His head, ears twitching, Sawyer opened it to find a woman standing on the porch, her arms wrapped around a thick wool scarf. Rachel Fairbanks was 36, tall and lean, with auburn hair pulled back in a low braid that peeked out beneath a knitted beanie. She wore a forest green coat and boots dusted with road salt. Rachel had been Sawyer's closest friend in high school. After college, she returned to Pineville and became a second-grade teacher. She had kind eyes and a voice like honey over warm bread.